see the wisdom to this. So I think that we ought to be able to build that, but we've got to build it by recognizing, we've got to do it without the United States unless it normalizes and becomes like a regular country again. And we have to make the rest of the world understand why it's still a good thing for the rest of us.
Let's have a last intervention from Indermit on that. And then just to get your questions ready, after this, I want to go to the floor. So if you want to, but please, Indermit, you're ready to jump in on that.
So I agree with Danny on so many things, but then occasionally I disagree vehemently with him about some stuff. And I was thinking, why is that the case? Is it because of his Harvard education? Or is it because he lives on an island very far away from here, or something, or some combination of the two? Because he's a super smart guy. But this thing about, you said that there's this one country that wants to sort of not be part of the world, in a sense, the world economy. So during the spring meetings, Danny, I was struck by my conversations with people from around the world, okay? And in particular, I was struck by the conversations with people from Europe. And at the end of the meeting, because they all came in with this thing about the US wanting to withdraw from the world and so on. But at the end of the meetings, Justin, it was very clear that the part of the world that was withdrawing from the rest was Europe, not America. America does not want to withdraw from the rest of the world. It wants to change its relations, or the way that it relates in terms of aid, in terms of trade, in terms of investment, other things. It wants to change those things. It's not withdrawing. So if you think that it's withdrawing, you're in for a nasty surprise, okay? It's not, okay? Or a good surprise, I don't know which, right? So I actually believe that at the end of it, I found that it was the Europeans who were much more passive, much more much more defensive, not just about America, but also about Asia, okay? And so they would complain and complain about the Trump administration, about this, about that. And then I would ask them, I would say, and what are you going to do about it? They didn't have a clue, okay? And so now, after that, I see this new initiative. It's called Europe First. I mean, for God's sake, at least be innovative, you know? Don't just copycat America, all right? Okay. So I don't know how you can be so wrong about these things. I think we need you to come and spend some time in Washington for a little while and get rid of these really bad ideas.
All right, we'll get a last word, but I'm going to again encourage people to come to the mic if you've got, we'll have one round of questions for the panel. But please, Danny, you get a right of response. Yeah.
I look forward to sitting at your feet and learning the truth about the world. But let me say, it is not Europe that's withdrawn from the Paris Agreement on climate change. It is not Europe that has filed papers to withdraw from the World Health Organization. It is not Europe that's likely to withdraw from the World Trade Organization. It is not Europe that has turned its back on its security partners over the last 8 decades, built on a foundation that came out of the Second World War and the Cold War. I think we're going to have a lively debate in the months ahead.
All right, I'm happy to keep asking questions if nobody comes up to the mic, but there we go, as soon as I actually look out. Again, questions briefly, please, and we'll take a round. So
it's two quick questions. The first one is that, how much the unlimited information or misinformation is a fundamental factor behind the populism, because this access to information increases the expectation, and the unmet expectation creates the populism. The second question is that how much the populism is challenge to development versus how much it is opportunity for the development. Thank you.
Great. Next, please.
Yes, I wanted to ask if maybe AI is in the middle of the disagreements between the two of you both ways, because Europe has suddenly changed in the last 3 months from doing no AI to being pretty progressive. Meanwhile, I don't know how the world can get on without America's AI sort of thing. So I know it's a big subject, but I do think that might be where we're getting muddled.
AI, okay, next please.
All right, thank you. I had 2 questions if possible. using the same core periphery language. The first would be about the core and policies that could increase public opinion, improve public opinion. I'm a political scientist. I think the idea of race and the foreigner and the core countries that we consider would be important in addressing some of these populist policies that are driven by policymakers. What can countries in the core do about that? So maybe learn from a country like Uganda that has hosted a disproportionate share of refugees and immigrants, but still has maintained pretty good public opinion about them. The second would be about the peripheral so-called countries and encouraging development community, encouraging collaboration between these countries, on trade, infrastructure, education, right? It's harder to fly between countries in Africa than from Africa to some other continent, and that's, I think, one the how it reflects this cooperation. So how can this community do that?
Great. South-South cooperation question, please.
Thank you. My question is about, this is a top-down analysis, but at the same time, what bottoms up? One word, youth, and maybe two words, youth opportunities. If there's an anger, lack of opportunity, lack of innovation related because of no availability. So that is a point where, what is a youth opportunity that may be fueling the anger, and we will be analyzing it as a statistical aggregate of left, right, or states or institutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel, you mentioned how we push non-experts from development, and that really stuck with me. And I was surprised also how many Americans applauded the USAID decision. So it feels like we failed to make development understandable and relatable and relevant for the people, and the people want to help. Look, for example, the RED program that Global Fund launched and how many people wanted to help. So question very simple. How can we build a bridge from between what we do and what the people see and understand that we do? You said simplify, but I'm asking for more here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my question was mostly related to the U.S.'s role, particularly within the role of formal international agreements, such as the Pandemic Accord and other non-binding agreements. How can they establish global norms despite the U.S.'s implications in withdrawing from all of these formal institutions? And is good faith effort still an effective way of people to adhere?
Great.
Hi, I'd like to ask you, Justin, to comment on, in effect, the disagreement between Intermit and Danny.
You want to referee?
Because what I've heard to date, until Danny intervened, was, there's some problems, there's populism, and it's not exactly our fault. But we've been screwing up terribly, and if there's a lot of populism around, it's because we haven't had new ideas, and we just have screwed up. And Danny has come along and he said, the world is a pretty uneven kind of place. There are always problems, but it looks like one country has been tearing up stuff that it's been trying to put together for the last 8 decades. And we need to find ways to work around that. And I wonder, because these are two big competing themes, why don't you give a few comments on that?
Request registered. Thank you. Our last question before we go back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I'm from Tamil Nadu, India, and it's quite famous there for political parties to give out freebies before an election. So it's very common to see people living in informal settlements but having 2 TVs, 2 mixies, and it's not clearly helping them. But there can also be a lot of policies like the first free 100 units of electricity that's quite helpful for the common people. So I want to ask, when can such freebie culture be a populist distortion, and when it can be a good redistributive reform? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so the advantage of many questions on the floor is you get to pick and choose the ones that you think you can say something most interesting to. We don't have time to go through all of them. Let me just go down the row here and start with you, Rachel, for your closing answer.
Okay, so on unlimited information and misinformation, I actually think part of why we have populism now is because we are more democratic. There are many attitudes now that have become popular, political strategies, which the population has believed in for a long time, but which elites were in charge and they just dismissed. So in many ways, I've written a lot about how do you increase democracy. I think it's very important. But I think part of what's going on, for example, trade has always been unpopular. Free trade has always been unpopular, but now we're in a situation where, that unpopularity is actually feeding into policy, which goes, means it's far beyond misinformation. I think what can we do about changing people's attitudes to foreigners? There's a lot of evidence that actually the contact hypothesis is true. Like the more people interact with people who are not like them, the more they accept and like them. So this is very different to the attitude that, the reason we've got a backlash to migration is because we've had migration. Actually, the evidence is the more that you integrate groups, new groups, the more people accept them. I'm just going to pick up on the pandemic point because this is a big passion of mine. Having worked a lot on vaccine policy during the pandemic, there is a lot that we could do and need to be doing to get ready for the next pandemic, because it is not a question of when it happens, of if it happens, but when. And I think the World Bank has a huge amount to do to help countries basically be able to take the strategies that the US and the UK took to accelerate vaccines, but was not open to low and middle income countries. There's a lot more I could say about that, but I think actually the pandemic accord and many of the strategies that have been put forward are not actually the answer.
All right, Danny and Indermit, I'm going to have to ask you to pick your favorite question and answer that one.
Yeah, let me just say one thing, and I want to use that one thing to address the question about information, question about race and culture, and question about youth opportunity. I think that what we've seen because of the disruption in economic conditions due to trade and growth allows fertile ground for those who wish to manipulate social anger. Identity politics and race and culture is a constant. Nobody changes the identity in that way over 2 decades. However, over 2 decades, we have seen social unrest grow 4-fold worldwide. That comes hand in hand with the idea that as local economic conditions get disrupted, people fear that they are trapped into patterns of social immobility. That matters for youth, that matters for racially sensitive populations, and the inability of our policymakers to be able to address the disruption in local economic conditions, address the challenges of income inequality, and through that, something called a Great Gatsby curve, where higher inequality leads to lower social mobility, has led to ever-rising anger. We need to stem that vicious cycle. And I think we need to sit down now and develop the tools in our conversations between experts like Rachel, policymakers, and communication experts to break that vicious cycle. And I'm hopeful we can.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer the question that Christopher asked, but I'm just using that question just to pick on Danny again. And so actually, the point that Danny made is the point that that all of my relatives in India make. And I don't mean that as a compliment, because my relatives are not a very smart lot. We are from Punjab. Yeah, okay. So basically what they say is that the US is a declining power. You know, you're not saying that. You're saying that the US is a withdrawing power. But they say that the US is a declining power. And so I asked them a simple question. I said, do you think American enterprise is a declining thing? And they said, no, actually, American enterprise is very dynamic, it's very big, it's very influential around the world. And so I said, well, in that case, why do you think that the US is a declining power? Because America's strength always has been enterprise, not its government. People around the world have imitated those arrangements, not those of government. I mean, nobody's come up with a primary system like the one that we have here, right? But people have come up with private enterprise. So then the next question is, of course, then you have to ask the following question. You say, so will the influence of the United States through its enterprise system, which is the point that Christopher made, is that going to diminish or is that going to continue unabated? Because that ultimately was the main influence of the US economy on the rest of the world. Now, you could talk about the other arrangements in these public institutions and so on. And if you look at the record of that, I think that actually the record of the US signing on to ILO treaties, et cetera, has been very patchy at best and very sort of up and down, you know? So we might be seeing that down part now. I think the real question is, will the influence of the US enterprise sector, will it diminish over the next decade, or will it increase or continue unabated? I think that's the debate to have.
Great. I look forward to the calls you're going to get from the European EDs at the end of this session. Thank you to all of the panelists for a stimulating conversation and the many, many questions. One round of applause for our panel.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to now have a quick 10-minute coffee break. So please go grab a coffee.
Ilan arke barse lanchira mama karufo